Now, let's be honest, you probably don't have a completely maxed deck, do you? But don't worry, you're not alone. The case is the same for 99% of the players on the ladder, because in Clash Royale, the unfortunate truth is that levels do matter if you want to push high on the ladder. So, first things first, how do you get levels? Well, it's pretty self-explanatory, right? Stick to one single deck on the ladder and start maxing out the cards one by one through requests, trading, as well as from chests. Eventually, over the course of several months, you will probably have close to a maxed out deck. However, maxing out a deck requires time, and that is exactly what we don't have right now. Hey guys, it's Legendaray here, and today I will be giving out my 4 biggest tips to succeed even when you are underleveled on the ladder. But before we get into the list, be sure to check out my Instagram and Twitter. Links will be down in the description. Any support is greatly appreciated, and without further ado, let's get right into the list. Number 1, picking a good deck. As obvious as it sounds, a good deck is essential if you want to beat higher leveled players on the ladder. But here's the catch, just because a deck works well at a tournament standard doesn't mean it works well when it's underleveled. So there are 2 paths you can take when building a deck specialized for the struggles of ladder. The first method is to build a deck that is much less level dependent. Here are my list of suggested cards. From win conditions, we have Sparky, Graveyard, P.E.K.K.A, and Golem. From support cards, we have Giant Skeleton, Inferno Tower, Inferno Dragon, Guards, Mega Minion, Prince, Tornado, Lumberjack, and Mini P.E.K.K.A. And in the cheap card section, we also have Skeletons, Skeleton Army, Ice Spirit, Spear Goblins, Bats, and Fire Spirits. Now, of course, even though it's a long list, it's still not comprehensive. There are still a lot of other cards that work well, even if you don't have those levels as high as you would like. Now, the goal of this approach is to build a deck that works well while being underleveled, which allows you to have a bit of an easier time overcoming players who do have that level advantage. Also, be sure to include a way to heavily punish your opponents if they make a mistake. For example, Miner Control would not be a good deck to play when you're underleveled, because the Miner just does not provide enough of a threat and can be simply ignored when not at an adequate level. Now, of course, after building this deck, you can either focus on leveling this deck up, or you can work on leveling up a second deck in the background, perhaps a more free-to-play friendly deck to eventually switch to once you can level that deck high enough. For example, on my mini account, I'm working on leveling up my Expo Cycle deck while pushing with a variety of other decks. Now, the second approach to picking up a good deck is to straight up start off with a super free to play friendly deck. Examples include Mortar Bait, Mortar Hog, Hog Cycle, Expo, Classic Bait, and so on. Now, this is a bit of a more difficult method to start off with, but it does pay off a little more in the long run, because if you learn how to play a deck when it's underleveled, you'll become an even better player once those levels start going up. Now, this is a much more appealing method if you already have some of those cards at a decently high level, and it works just as well, to be completely honest. Either way, no matter what deck you choose to run, make sure you really hone in on upgrading one single deck as high as you possibly can, because ultimately you do have to have those levels to progress higher and higher into the top ladder range. Number 2, tower damage. This is another important tip, and is why I don't usually recommend playing siege decks if you are underleveled. Similar to a beatdown type archetype, when your card levels aren't as high, you're gonna have to take a little more tower damage if you know that you can create a much stronger offense. Also, be much more controlled in your playstyle as well. This means focusing on defending first, using your crown towers to create positive trades, then counter pushing with a built elixir advantage. Now, of course, this is something that comes with practice. Knowing how much to spend on defense while still maintaining a threatening offense is not an easy feat, but if you stick to a single deck for a few weeks and analyze your replays, you will begin to get a good feel for it. Generally, the cheaper the deck, the less damage you will want to take, and the heavier the deck, the more damage you will be able to afford on your towers, allowing you to convert tower damage into an elixir advantage and thus overwhelming your opponent. That being said, be very cognizant of your opponent's spells. Since their spells will probably be over level 2, be sure to either space out your troops so your opponents can't get spell value, or hold back a little. Wait for your opponent to use their spells first, and then just dump your troops when their spells are out of cycle. This leads to my next point. Number 3. bait. Bait is another important aspect to pay attention to, especially against players that do have overleveled cards. It can be important to bait out your opponent's counters. Now of course, the easiest example of this is the bait archetype. With cards such as Skeleton Army, Goblin Barrel, Princess, and even cards such as Witch, you're requiring your opponents to use their small spell, thus freeing you up to use any of your other small spam units. Now, this also applies to a ton of other situations. Let's give a few examples. Use a Collector to bait out your opponent's Fireballs to make room for 3 Musketeers. Use a Wizard to bait out your opponent's Rockets to make room for a Sparky. Use some Bats to bait out a Zap to make room for an Inferno Tower. And finally, like I said earlier, hold back on offense until you bait out your opponent's big spell, and then you can just completely unload and dominate. Number 4. Overcommitting. When underleveled, it becomes even more important that you don't overcommit, because your underleveled cards will be much easier to defend than your opponent's cards will be. If you overcommit on a push and your opponent is very easily able to defend, more often than not, you'll be stuck with no elixir while your opponent counter pushes with all he's got in return. So, how do you prevent this from happening? As I said earlier, focus really hard on being in a control style mindset, focusing on defending first on your side of the arena. On your side of the arena, your crown towers will help out on defense a lot, and it's so much easier to make positive trades than it is on offense. Try and make your opponent overcommit first, then turn the tables right on him with your own elixir advantage, and then counter push. So there we go. 4 big tips on countering overleveled cards on the ladder. Of course, I can't emphasize enough, make sure you stick to one main deck to level up, and once you do get those levels up, you will have a much better time on the ladder. But for now, hopefully these tips will help you improve your performance on the ladder as well, and I hope you learned something from today's video. But unfortunately guys, that's all I've got time for in today's episode. If you enjoyed, please leave a like down below as well as a subscription to my channel, and as always, this is Legendaray, and I'm signing off. See you guys next time.